Hello, and welcome to the Narrowing Path, Walking the Spiritual Walk. My name is Steve Van Eiderstein, and thank you for joining us. We are going to be going over a review of the second chapter of the book we're currently working through. And the book we're working through is called, this copy, I guess I'll say, is Believing in False Gods. I Was a Pagan by V.C. Kitchen. The original book, I don't have it immediately next to me, sorry about that, usually I do, is titled I Was a Pagan by V.C. Kitchen. So this reprint is actually a facsimile reprint. They just took the pictures of the pages and just printed them right page for page. So this goes right along with the actual original version. And it's really a fantastic book. It's got a lot of great things in it. The first chapter was great. Talked about the 5 P's and how it, which was power, prestige, position, possessions, and applause, and how the author worshipped those for the first 40 years of his life. And then he starts to have some different thinking, and that's where we read chapter 2. Chapter 2 was titled The Business of Thinking Things Out. I hope you all got the opportunity to check out the reading that I posted last week, gave it a couple of listens so you could follow along or got some perspective about what we were talking about. And this chapter has a lot of great stuff in it. It has a lot of self-help books. This is as far as they get. You'll know what I mean as we get into it. But this chapter is called The Business of Thinking Things Out. Philosophy, right? Which is good stuff. We have this association that if we have a good philosophy, a good understanding of life, that's a good thing for us, which it is. But there's something that's missing, and we'll get into that. So this is chapter 2. We're going to be going over just to recap real quick before we really get into it of I Was a Pagan by V.C. Kitchen. And here we go. So, the business of thinking things out. This first page, I stumble on it when I'm reading it, just because the wording in this book can be difficult, even for somebody like me I've read quite a bit of this age of reading, like the old early 1900s. This was written in 1934, which was around the time that Alcoholics Anonymous was actually being formed. So this was why this book was chosen. It was one of the books that was being read and relevant to the demographic, or to that group of people, that community of people at the time when the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous were getting themselves together, let's say. And then they began to write the big book shortly thereafter. So that's why this was chosen. But this was just so wordy. And what's interesting is the line right off the bat where he said, why can't we just live along without any purpose? And if you didn't catch it when I was reading it, don't worry, I didn't the first time either. What he goes into is him saying that regardless of whether you live for your own selfish pleasure and your own selfish ambitions, or to help others, to help society, or to serve a God of your understanding, regardless of what you live for, you cannot live for nothing. You cannot have a truly purposeless life. Even if you say, I only am going to live for what I feel like doing in that immediate moment spontaneously, you are still living a selfish and a self-serving life, right? Because what sounds good at the time, that's what you're going to go do. It might not be predictable, but you're serving yourself. You're serving that part of you, that ego self, as some might call it, right? So everyone lives for a purpose, whether they want to acknowledge it or not. And that was an interesting understanding for myself to come to, actually. Um, because when I'm somebody that's sober, I'm in recovery, and if you had asked me when I got started in my journey of recovery, why, what was my purpose, I would have told you similarly that I had no purpose. But the longer I've stayed around, the longer I've participated and I've grown spiritually, and I've done the work to stay and grow in the spiritual part of my life, I've found that my purpose was to serve my own comfort. In those years, I would drink and I would drug to achieve a certain effect so I felt better. Now, I couldn't have told you that in the beginning, but I had a very selfish and self-serving purpose. My goal was to serve my own comfort and my own perspective and my own well-being. I was very selfish and very self-centered. So, and what he was saying there too was if I live for any of these things in the hope of getting a little more fun, in the hope of being a little bit more help, or in the hope of serving some higher purpose, which I do not understand, I would, whether I admit it or not, be living for purpose, right? Um, he even said beforehand, if I couldn't live for anything like that, whether it be selfish, service to society, or service to God, I would probably just go find a window to jump out of. And the reality of it is, the unfortunate truth to that statement is showing up very clearly today. People that feel like they have no genuine purpose or direction in their lives. Seek very permanent solutions, which is unfortunate, which is very sad, which just gives testament to the fact that they were lost. They had no direction. They needed a helping hand, and there wasn't one there for them. They didn't find it, at least. And so that line just is still true today. It's he almost says it jokingly here, but it's a very true thing. It's a very real thing, and it's becoming so much more of a problem these days. So he identifies that one correctly, I'll say. Purposelessness is hopelessness and despair, all wrapped into one horrible experience. So next he talks about just guessing at the wrong purpose, right? I'm just going to read it. If I guessed at the wrong purpose I had in my own life, I would, of course, miss most of the fun, prove of the mighty little use in the world, and probably fail entirely to render any higher service. That was exactly my where I was. I didn't enjoy my life anymore. I was of help to nobody, and I couldn't actually be of service to any formulation or understanding of God or a higher power. When I haven't stated this in a while, but whenever I talk about God, I want you to take, I let it be known that that's your interpretation of God, that's your understanding of God. There's a lot of words for God. It could be source, it could be power of the universe, it could be Allah, it could be whatever you would like it to be. Right? I use the term God because that's what I refer to that power as. I'll try to be to reference these things a little bit more instead of just using the word singularly. But yeah, just that applies to wherever you're at in your spiritual journey or whatever your personally held beliefs are. So it could be nature. I know there's people that really get along with that. There could be it could be society if you're an atheistic person, right? So just that thing we're in service to that's higher than ourselves. So but that's where I was. I I miss most of the fun. I was little use in the world and probably fail entirely to render any higher service. And then he goes on to this to kind of make it a broader picture. And if men as a whole were equally bad guessers, the world as a whole would pay the penalty in exactly the same way. I think I mentioned it during the actual reading of the chapter, but that's what's going on. People are in search of just something to fill themselves now. There's so many that are missing the fun, that aren't really of genuine use and help. And they aren't serving a higher purpose. And that's because that guessing as to what we're serving, we're guessing wrong. I chose poorly in the first life that I was blessed with. I do believe I was blessed with a second one. In the sense of I was able to change and be a different person. And I have a different purpose for living today. Now, that's just such an important thing to establish, right? Like, I chose poorly in the first years of my life. I'm choosing differently now, and my life is significantly better. I have I have a lot of good times. I can be of use to people, and hopefully I can be of service to the God of my understanding, too. I feel like I do that much better than I ever had previously. So, and then he goes on to say, education and marriage should all be about serving this higher purpose, serving the point of life. But if you don't know what it's about, you're just going to make things up, right? You're going to choose things for the wrong reasons. And that goes into all areas of life, right? He talks about his belief in the desire for the 5 unfortunate P's that I referenced earlier. And how that failed for him, right? It goes into, there is a plan, a design for living in which our job is to have a pleasant time as possible, to enjoy life to the full, to experience as much as we can and take pleasure when we find it, because trouble will find us anyhow. With no further purpose or aim, that plan be described as egoism. So it's a completely selfish and self-serving lifestyle. That is the pursuit of those 5 P's that we talked about before: pleasure, position, power, prestige, possessions, and applause, right? When pursuing those, that's just egoism. That's all selfish, self-serving, egotistical living. So, and then he goes into, I'll just make sure, how maybe we should just serve society in total, right? That we should sacrifice ourselves in service to the society and the furtherment and betterment of society, right? We should serve our fellow man and only our fellow man. Right, and he goes on to call that humanism, and the end goal of that one really is socialism and communism. Right, those are some hot button words, right? But that's when we try to solely only serve our fellow man. But as proven over and over and over again, that doesn't seem to work out too well, does it? It never actually manifests the way we predict it's going to. It's been the reasoning from millions and millions of dead. So, and then he starts to talk about his experience with religion then, right? To be of service to this God. Right, sorry about that. Technical difficulties. I'm going to have to shoot this in 2 videos, so I apologize for the cut. I usually like to shoot it in one, but I was too far into it to redo the whole thing. So, forgive the technical issue. So anyway, we were getting into, we just talked about humanism, and then he talks about his experience going to church, and he saw this person that he wanted to be exactly like. It was a Wall Street broker, and he had money and all this stuff, and he was committed to do whatever that man said, right? He committed almost to be of service to that man, and he had a religious experience, right? And where he was just on cloud 9, or some might call it a pink cloud, for 3 days. And that is what he related back to theism. So he's talked about egoism, self-serving, humanism serving society only, and then theism serving God. So up until this point, these are just his observations, his experiences, and the beginnings of his own understandings, right? So he's dipped into this philosophical realm of living, and he's trying to figure out the purpose. So he goes in next on 28 and 29, if you're following along, to say, I had written no books. I had gotten no external input. These were just my own personal observations. This was what I was working towards. This is what I was trying to understand, right? And he finally came off his egotistical high horse and said, I'm going to check everything else out. He was saying he didn't want his purity of thought. What did he say here? Original line of thought tarnished. All right. At this stage, however, I decided to check up and found my reasoning supported at almost every turn by philosophical thought. I found, in fact, throughout the ages, philosophy followed far enough, had led and could lead only to God. Plato, with his speculative theory of ideas, Aristotle, with his logic, Descartes, onto his ontology, with his ontology, Spinoza, with his world of eternal verities, Berkeley with his idealism, Hegel with his Trinity, and the great V.C. Kitchen with his neo-pragmatism, had come to the same ultimate conclusion, and so too had modern thought, after the denial of God found in the early socialistic and scientific philosophy. So he's saying, oh man, look at all these people agree with me, and if you follow out their line of thinking, there's got to be a God at the end of all of this. There's got to be some concept of a power greater than ourselves, a creator, an energy that's formed this universe, blah, blah, blah. Right? So he finds himself in good company, right? I mean, that's where all of us want to find ourselves, in the self-identified pool with those minds, right? And he continues to look into this stuff, and he looks into the scientific world, and he finds that the scientific world's even starting to agree that nature must be benevolent in its origins, and that how did he say it here? And he added that the practical teaching of modern science was extraordinarily like the preaching of Jesus. This view would seem to suggest soul growth is the prime objective of existence. So he's found a purpose now, right? He's identified something that he believes he has to live for. Soul growth, not moral growth, or excuse me, not societal growth in the sense of look at me, not a egotistical growth, but a soul growth, right? Other scientists stated that there was unquestionably a force in the universe working to produce or modify human personality, and it did not hesitate to call that force the power of God. So he goes on to be very excited that everything is continuing to line up to what he believes the purpose of life is, this soul growth. And he sums it up in this last line, which I really actually enjoy, because it's exactly where a lot of our society is today, right? So life was intended to grow souls, not fortunes, to make character, not whoopee, to gain depth of understanding, not eminence in business or social circles, to seek the will of God, not the praise of the public, right? Our materialistic and egotistical, self-serving societies today, they think we live to grow fortunes, to have all these sexual exploits, to gain prestige and power and business and so societally, and to find the praise and approval of the public. That is what so many people strive for. That is the end goal of so many people. Live for those things. Now, if you remember in chapter 1, he talked about how he had achieved at least some measure of those things in his life, and it just was defeating. He was a hollow, empty, miserable man. And he says, Life was intended to grow souls, to make character, to gain depth of understanding, to seek the will of God. That's what we're here for. I certainly had been living the wrong way to accomplish these results. Well, that resonates with me. I still can. I still am. I'm not. I haven't figured out how to do it all the time, but I do my best. And when I say I do my best, it's my intention to live this way all the time. But sometimes I stray. Sometimes I am not always on the path that I think I'm on. Right? My ego shows up, and it can be very tricky sometimes. So now he's mentioned it a couple of times in this chapter, but he was writing this book trying to help other people, like trying to find this purpose in life, right? So and I at last could begin to do something for other people. No, let me start here. Knowing what I was living for, I at last could begin to do something about it, and I at last could begin to do something for other people. After reading my book, in fact, I was sure that the burdened world could immediately arise from its ashes. Proudly, therefore, I wrapped up my manuscript and carried to my publisher. So here we go. VC Kitchen. Drunk. Selfish. Self-centered person. Thinks he found the key and the answer to the world, that we should be living to be of service to the God of our understanding, that our goal should be growth of soul. Not a bad understanding, not a bad goal, not a bad purpose, right? And he's just think he's solved the problems for the world. Isn't that funny? He just, I was sure that the burdened world could immediately rise from its ashes. So, I mean, given if you've listened to the chapter, given the way that was stated, like obviously we got some more to learn, right? This is chapter 2. There's about 18 chapters in this book. So where are we going next, right? So he goes into his experience with it. So he dropped it off to a publisher who was a friend of his. And he said, this life and why is as fine as far as it goes. Now write the second part. He didn't even think about this. VC Kitchen didn't even think about this. Life and how. And he was like, excuse me, what is it? What do you mean? Once people realize what their purpose is, of course their lives are going to get better, right? What, he replied, is the use of telling anyone why they are living if you cannot tell them how to live? How powerful a line is that? How incredible of a line is that, right? Like, you can live for soul growth, but what does soul growth mean? How do you grow a soul? And he gets all upset, and he walks home, and he calls his favorite drinking partner, and then his business partner. He calls them over. He has them read it. And he talks to them about it, and they're like, yeah, what do you mean by growing a soul? And how do you grow it? He wasn't getting the co-signing that he thought. He wanted someone to tell him, hey, they're crazy. You were good. You were right. They just obviously didn't understand you, right? That's what he was looking for, a little bit of validation and to lick his wounds a little bit. But didn't get it from his friends. But, of course, just like anybody, he sought out enough people until he found someone that did co-sign with him, that puffed up his ego a little bit, which is pretty funny how it turns out, though, right? So, impatient with such petty minds, very condescending or degrading way to refer to somebody else, I laid the book at last before my old professor of philosophy. He furnished some balm for my wounds. All right, so he brings it to a philosophy professor to get his opinion on his philosophy. Right? He furnished some balm for my wounds. In your own mind, he said, you have been thinking along the lines of some half dozen of the leading philosophers. All right, I love that. That sounds great for my ego. But to sharpen up your thought, to refine your philosophy, try taking the high spots and boil them down into short, helpful articles with particular attention to the application of your philosophy as a guide to self-management in business, at home, and in all other departments of practical day living, right? So he said, oh, no, this is great. Just Tell people why believing this will help their lives. And he was like, all right, let's go. Let's do this. So he said he began to write an article series and send it out. What else can we do in education? What else can we do for business? What else can we do about marriage? What else can we do to snap out of depression? And finally, what else can we do to be happy? So he just wrote and sent these out, and he would talk about how understanding that we were living for the growth of soul should impact our families, should impact our happiness, should impact our education, should impact our lives in all areas, right? I tried, as I wrote, to show just how the knowledge that we are living to grow souls could and should affect our happiness. So just know that your purpose is to grow your soul and your life is going to change, right? I tried to show how this viewpoint should and would affect our relations at home, revise the conduct of our business, revolutionize the methods and aims of education. Right? Like he just took this grand idea. He was like, this will help everybody. And up until this point, it's kind of, you might even be on board with it, right? But still nothing happened. My articles came back from magazines just as my book came back from the publisher. People apparently did not appreciate this sort of work. They didn't understand me. And a horrible suspicion began to dawn. Perhaps my writing did not really help them. Finally, he has an enlightening thought saying, well, maybe I'm wrong. Then the full truth burst upon me. My new philosophy not only failed to help others, but failed to help me. Despite my new assurance that I was living to grow a soul, I continued to live as I had always lived. Much as in the days when, in my ignorance, I believed that I was living to grow a fortune, a family, and a thirst. There was actually no difference in my daily conduct. So he's saying right here, I'm telling these people that if you know that your purpose in life is to grow a soul, your life will change. But he emphatically believes that his purpose in life is to grow a soul, and nothing in his life has changed. He lives exactly the same. He has the exact same actions. And I was no different as a man. What? How incredible of a thing is that? Right? Despite my article on what else can we do to be happy, I myself was actually no happier than I had been before. I was, if anything, even more discontented. Despite the recognition that marriage was a relationship for helping men, women, and their children grow in soul, no new growth, except for accepting out of last year's clothes, could be noted in any member of my family. I found no new attitude and obtained no new results in business. I began to read no different type of book and made no change in my self-prescribed and somewhat casual course in late life education. And then I voted the Republican ticket and hoped for the best as usual. I was just as helpless about helping other people as I had always had been. This living for God's service should finally have somehow awakened a new interest in church, but I found myself continuing to play golf or sleeping off a Saturday night hangover on Sunday morning. There was no stirring in my soul. My new philosophy of life, in short, did not seem to show itself at all in any new way of living. Now, how incredible is that? How many people have tried to change their life by developing a new philosophy on life, by trying to get as much knowledge as possible into 12-step rooms, and depending on what rooms you're in, you say self-knowledge availeth us nothing, right? You can learn as much as you want to learn. But if all you're doing is learning and you're living the same way, guess what? Nothing's going to change. Honestly, you just might get more shame and guilt because you know you shouldn't be doing the same things, but you still are. This is why people continue to drink. This is why people continue to drug, why people continue to have all these other bad behaviors or behaviors they wish they would be able to change, right? And have different and all these outcomes that they wish would not continue to happen. But you can have as much knowledge about the world as you want. You can have as much knowledge about your purpose as you want. But if that's all you have is knowledge, guess what? Nothing's going to change. Nothing. He goes into next, and then I looked back at once more at Plato, Aristotle, Descartes, Spinoza, and all these people, and they held a similar philosophy, and they got it out to the world much better than VC Kitchen has, right? But yet their lives didn't change. They too had somehow failed to change the world. Men always, it seemed, had been frustrated in their aims, whether they believed they were living to grow a soul and planned to promote that end, or whether in my case they had simply given way to self-indulgence. Regardless of its various philosophies, the world had continued to run in the same vicious cycle of moral defeats, economic depressions, internal antagonisms, armament races, and wars. I'm just probably going to read this out to the end. Had I known then what I know now, I might have seen that my entire philosophical fiasco was, at bottom, nothing but a further assertion of egoism parading under a mask of altruism. Look what I learned. I know more than you. Let me give this to you so you are better, because I'm coming down and showing you this. But he had not been able to change a thing about himself. It was an idea, well-established idea, long-standing idea, and he was only doing it to tell people, look at this idea I have. That's a humbling thing to realize. Under the mask of altruism, the ego is a tricky thing. It'll manifest in a lot of ways. Look at all these people I'm helping. No, you're just trying to show off, saying you know all these things. It was just another form of self-service disguised as social service. A desire to show off, a pretense that I was living and thinking nobly, used to hide the ignoble way that I really thought and lived. An attempt to convert the world to my way of thinking in order that I, unperturbed and undisturbed, might continue in my own way of living. My consideration for society, in short, was nothing but a subtle form of self-protection. So I'm going to live this way. I'm going to believe that this philosophy, I'm going to tell you to live this philosophy, so you have to change, but I don't. Because it's mine. I'm telling you that you have to do this, and this will change your life. And I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing, telling you that you have to change, or that you have to change your purpose and serve this purpose. And then I'll just keep living the way I'm living. And then I don't have to do anything, right? A subtle form of self-protection. It's amazing how he was able to kind of tease this out of the actual situation. What a beautiful thing to get that blessing of that perspective and that vision, right? Not everyone gets that. Not everyone goes to that point of understanding, right? Now, this last paragraph, this is why I'm wrong to read out to the end, is incredibly important and sets the tone for the rest of the book and is exactly what this whole channel is about. I might also have seen that even if it were possible to think and reason disinterestedly, philosophy at best could be nothing more than a point of view about life. And a point of view does not, never has, and never can substitute for a point of contact with the power that makes philosophy applicable to living. So, what he's saying there is, if all you have is a knowledge of why you're living, all you have is knowledge of what you should be doing, it will not serve you. Nothing will change. There's a lot of people with a lot of knowledge that are still living the same way and have the same lives. They might have changed their perspective a little bit. They might have adopted a new philosophy, a new understanding, but they haven't actually taken the steps to have a point of contact with life, right? I loved that. Hold on, let me read that again. And a point of view does not, never has, and never can substitute for a point of contact with the power that makes philosophy applicable to living. Right? So you're going to have to do something. You're going to have to take some action. Faith without works is dead, they say. Right? You can believe that growth of soul is the purpose of life, to be of service to the God of your understanding and to others. Whatever your belief is, whatever your philosophy is, your perspective is, if you take no actions to back that up, you'll never have that point of contact with the actual world. There's no bridge. There's the world and your actions, and then there's your point of view. Your actions need to reflect your point of view to actually come and produce what the philosophy would bring into this world, right? And that's what he's saying here. He did a whole lot of thinking things out. He did a whole lot of philosophical research. He did a whole lot of learning and gaining of knowledge to have nothing change. He was missing a piece. So that was it. Thank you so much for joining me for that review of chapter 2. I loved it. It was absolutely, this is where a lot of people stop. A lot of people think they can get a new philosophy of life and then everything will change. No, it will not. Sorry. Don't mean to be the bearer of bad news here, but someone had to tell you. That will not change a damn thing. What you do will change something. So, next week will be the business of meaning well and doing badly. Subheading is morals. Subheading, whatever it is morals. So, here we go. Meaning of doing well. What was it? Meaning well and doing badly. So, next part seems to be about that little phase where we want to do better. We're figuring out how to do better. So that's always encouraging. It's fun to see people actually go through that. And because it's when they start to figure it out and they start to get the rewards of living differently, it's beautiful to see that light come on for somebody. So there we go. But thank you all for joining me again tonight. I appreciate it. And I will continue to post the readings and reviews. I was considering changing the format to read and review at the same time, do half a chapter every week that was presented to me. Let me know your thoughts on that. Yeah, I'm open to hearing about it, but until I make an official decision, I'm going to keep reading it, reading the chapter, next week doing the review. Then we get the whole book read chapter by chapter, as well as a list of reviews. So, but I appreciate y'all jumping on with me. I hope you enjoyed this review, and until next time, thanks.